everyone. Nice to be back. This is this is part 3 of our series of A Hot Mess. And tonight we're going to be talking about hormonal imbalances. So if you have joined in with us the last few weeks, we've been talking all sorts of things with women's health. First off, I'll introduce myself for everybody who's just joining in and you haven't been a part of this series, but my name is Chelan Wilkins. I'm a registered holistic nutritionist and I'm actually based out of Vancouver. So what we've been doing for the last few weeks is we've been talking about women's health and hormones, leading up to a webinar that I will be doing with Nature's Fair tomorrow evening on redefining women's health. So for the last month, we've just been, talking all different kind of things with women's health. And then tomorrow we're going to put it all together and hopefully leave you guys with a webinar full of information of how to redefine your health and how to embrace, being a woman and how to look after ourselves and all the things that we need to do to ensure that we live a long, healthy life. So tonight we're going to talk about hormonal imbalances. So I'm going to start from the beginning a little bit, just for those of you who have just kind of joined in on this series, just to give a little bit of a background about the hormones that I'm talking about. I'm going to dive into what those hormonal balances are that we need to be aware of, as well as I'm going to, give suggestions of how you can go about being proactive to hopefully avoid hormonal imbalances, or if you are suffering from hormonal imbalances, the next steps that you can do through supplementation and diets, and there are different tests that you can do to work with a naturopath and speaking to professionals to help you, bring your body back to balance, because that is one of the things that I've talked a lot about in the last couple of weeks of this series is how much that our body really likes to be in balance. It needs to be in something called homeostasis. So I've talked a lot about how, our body likes to be in balance. And more specifically, I've talked about how our hormones like to be in balance. So when one hormone's out, they're all out. So we're going to dive into all those kind of things. So for those of you who are signing in, see lots more people are signing in. So I just want to tell you a quick thing too, before I get going on all this information. But what we've been doing during these series is that we have been doing a giveaway at the end of my talk. So I'll probably talk for about 45 minutes. I could talk forever, but I try to keep it down to 45 minutes. So one lucky listener and viewer tonight will get to win a free Harmony product of their choice between the menopausal products or the Balance product, which is great for hormonal imbalances. So to be entered in to win this, you just need to show lots of those hearts on that screen. So press that heart button or ask any questions or open to comments, anything. I'm here to answer those questions. What I've been doing after, if I don't get to your question on the screen, I've been at the end of the session, I've just been going back onto Nature's Fair page and individually answering all those questions as I can. So don't be shy, ask away. This is our hour to learn some new stuff and also for you guys to win a prize. So these are the products that are up for grabs, and I'm always happy to answer these questions about these products later on. They are available at Nature's Fair. Okay, so let's dive in. So when we're talking about hormonal imbalances, I want you guys to remember that this is not something that just happens as we get older. So a lot of women have kind of, spent their years living their life with, having irregular periods or having painful periods or having a lot of cramping or going through a lot of PMS symptoms. So maybe you're retaining water weight or you have some acne. So a lot of women been just like, this is just how my period is. Well, I'm here to tell you that that shows that there's an imbalance of hormones that are responsible for our periods. So the main hormones that we're going to talk about tonight and that I've talked about in the past is estrogen. And we're going to talk about progesterone, a little bit about DHEA, because DHEA is actually our master hormone or our mother hormone. So it's responsible for creating other hormones in our body. And DHEA, I can't say it too fast, otherwise it just slurs together. DHEA is also, it doesn't get a lot of talk, but it's really important. So I always like to get you guys to know that hormone because it is responsible for the other hormones, but it's also our anti-aging hormones. So when we actually start to get older, DHEA naturally starts to decrease. It naturally peaks when we're in our early 20s. Well, maybe I'd say maybe mid-20s. And then as we get older, which is what was supposed to happen, those levels will start to decrease. But other things can play a role in our hormones, lowering and not being enough production in our body. So when we think about those hormones, like I said, estrogen, progesterone, and DHEA, there is another hormone, cortisol, that you guys heard me talk a lot about, which is our stress hormone, which plays a role in all of those things. So let's go right back to that beginning with those hormones. So stress when we're under a lot of stress, we create cortisol, right? So cortisol is released from our adrenal glands in response to stress. So how many of us ladies, and if there's men watching, how many of us right now are feeling a lot of stress? Especially over this last 12 to 14 weeks, we've been under a lot more stress. So some of the things that we were talking about in the last few weeks is how our cycles could be irregular. We might be having more, PMS symptoms. We might be having different kinds of cycles, or they might be shorter, they might be longer. That's all in response to that cortisol. So that cortisol is one of the main hormones that we need to focus on when we're looking at other imbalances in the body. So remember when I said, when one hormone's out, they're all out in the body. So if we have an abundance of that cortisol, we really need to kind of look at the other areas of our body that produce hormones. And next thing that we kind of notice is, or the next area that we need to look at is our thyroid gland. So we look at the adrenal glands, we look at how much stress we're under. If we're under a lot of stress, we're pumping out way too much of that cortisol. What ends up happening is that our body can't keep up with that production. So we're not really doing anything to support our adrenal glands at this time, or if you're taking adrenal support, generally that helps lower the cortisol production that we have in our body. If we are not doing anything really for our stress levels, that, we need to kind of look at those things to help reduce that cortisol. So what ends up happening is when our adrenal glands are working so hard to keep pumping out that cortisol and these little shots of, it needs cortisol, all the stress we're getting, it starts to run out. It can't keep up with that production. So then it looks at our thyroid and it's like, hey, I'm going to steal a little bit of your thyroid, your production of your thyroid hormone to keep up with this cortisol, because right now the body is under so much stress. So just to put it in perspective, guys, when we're under a lot of stress, there's two different types of stress that we're under. We're under chronic stress and we're under acute stress. Right now, I'm sure all of us are living in something what is known as chronic stress. We have the same stressors every single day. It's kind of like Groundhog Day, right? We still are feeling the stress of things that are going on when it's coming, in regards to the global pandemic that we're under. If some of us are homeschooling our kids, if we've been laid off, if we're trying to work at home, we're trying to keep up with everything, that's chronic stress. Acute stress is basically what happens when something very traumatic happens in our life. So our body doesn't really know how to react, doesn't react differently to this. Our body just knows when we're under a lot of stress, we're going to pump out that cortisol. So just think about just think about how much of that cortisol that we're pumping out and not keeping up that production. So it goes into our thyroid. So when people are under a lot of stress, what ends up happening is that they can start to have low amounts of thyroid hormone production. So there's a huge correlation with people with hypothyroidism. So hypothyroidism, that's a big one, is when our thyroid is not producing enough of T3. So women actually, there's an epidemic of women today who are low in thyroid. And how many of you guys right now who are following or listening have a thyroid condition? So you've been diagnosed with hypothyroidism, or you have low thyroid hormone. Your doctor may be watching you go and get a thyroid test, and it's TSH, so your thyroid stimulating hormone. So they will test that, and that might show that it's high because it's trying to stimulate, or it's trying to produce enough of that thyroid hormone T3, and then, you know, you go further into your blood work and then you notice that T3 is really low, and that's what they'll diagnose you with hypothyroidism. And sometimes people get put on medications like Synthroid. So if you were to look online, the correlation and the similarities between having an adrenal insufficiency or having low thyroid, the symptoms that you actually experience are very similar. So I've always told my clients when I've worked with them, and I personally have hypothyroidism. So I've always told my clients when I've worked with them that if you are treating your thyroid, you 100% have to treat your adrenal glands, right? So remember how I said, when one hormone is out, the rest of them are out. So especially when we get into the sex hormones in a little bit, you really need to look at the adrenal health because they all work synergistically together. And if we have an imbalance there, we're going to have an imbalance in our other hormones. So some of you might be relating to this, and I'm looking at the messaging here. So some of you might be relating to this right now thinking, okay, yeah, I'm noticing I have a lot of stress. Some symptoms of adrenal insufficiency or adrenal dysfunction or adrenal fatigue, so that it's voiced in various ways, is obviously a lot of fatigue. So you're tired all the time. You could be doing something like wired and tired. So you wake up in the morning, you're not getting good sleeps at night. You're needing copious amounts of coffee to get through the day. You're running off straight adrenaline. Like you just bang things out all day long. You're just wired and tired. Like you can't stop, but you're exhausted. You might notice that you're having some insomnia. So if you are, let's say you wake up in the morning and you're not feeling that refreshed, you have a cup of coffee, 3 o'clock hits, then all of a sudden, you're ready to face plant your desk because you're so tired. Then you reach for the sugary snacks or the coffee. And then, what ends up happening is around 10 o'clock, you get your second wind, you can't fall asleep, you toss and turn, and you wake up at 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning because you're not getting enough of that melatonin. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how cortisol and melatonin basically sit on a teeter-totter together, right? So melatonin is our sleep hormone. So if we have way too much cortisol in our body, we're going to not be producing enough of that melatonin. So we need to make sure that we have that good balance of that cortisol and that melatonin. So if you're under a lot of stress, you may be noticing that you're not sleeping very well or you're not getting enough sleep. And then if you're not getting enough sleep, then that's going to raise your cortisol even more because that causes more stress in your body. So when we're looking at hormonal imbalance, melatonin and cortisol can definitely be the start of this. So moving on to our thyroid, and great, guys, this is all lots of great questions and comments, and I'm seeing these here, so don't worry, I will get to them all at the end, so thank you. When we're going into our thyroid, we want to make sure that we're supporting our thyroid, with the right foods. There are certain, selenium, iodine's really important when we're looking at thyroid conditions, but it's always really important to work with a natural practitioner to get your thyroid levels checked. So if you were to go to a conventional medicine doctor, so your family doctor, generally what ends up happening is that they will run a blood test, they'll check your TSH. Now, if your TSH is anything, I believe, I will go back and write the right number, but I believe if it's anything over 2, that they don't categorize that to check your T3. So generally, even if we have hypothyroidism, because this happened to me, is that my TSH wasn't showing anything abnormal, was still in the normal range. So they were like, your thyroid seems to be fine. It wasn't until I went to my naturopath, who I paid privately to have my T3 checked. When I went to my naturopath and he checked my T3 was actually so low. But my TSH wasn't affected yet because I hadn't had this for a long time. So if you're thinking that you may potentially have, thyroid conditions, or, you're noticing that you have hair loss, flaky skin, you have a lot of fatigue, weight gain, if you have a hard time, losing weight. So when it comes down to our thyroid gland is like our master gland when it comes to like our metabolism. So we need to make sure our metabolism is affected by our thyroid gland, our body temperature. So if you're feeling cold all the time, there's a variety of symptoms that come with hypothyroidism. So if you're feeling these kind of things going on, then I really suggest you go to a naturopath to go get, your thyroid panel checked. And you can also even get your cortisol levels checked, guys. So there are salivary tests that you can do that check your cortisol levels to see if you have too much cortisol in your body at the moment, and even can have too little cortisol. So if you get to a certain point that you are pumping out so much cortisol, your body will slowly stop producing it, and then you'll have too low of cortisol. So you can do that through a salivary test, or you can do it through a urine test, which is the most accurate way. So that's a 24-hour urine collection. It's a little bit, it's like a project homework that you have to do, but it is the most accurate, and it'll actually show you how, your cortisol levels, because cortisol likes to be on a curve. It'll show you how your cortisol is throughout the day, and it's actually really interesting to see, how your cortisol pans out, and your melatonin. So it's a great visual to see, what condition your adrenal glands are in. So those are two things that I would follow up with if you're working with a naturopath. So let's get into our sex hormones, because that's what we're really here to talk about, is hormonal imbalances. And I really want, like I mentioned earlier, this isn't just as we get older. So I'm a mother to a teenage daughter, and she is about to go into her next stage of life, so puberty. She hates when I talk about it. She probably hates that I do this for a living, but I wish my mom did this when I was younger and had conversations about this. But doing what I do, I think it's really important, because one of the things that happened to me when I first got my periods is that I had very painful periods. Like, I had to use a water bottle all through high school. They're very, very heavy from the start. I ended up getting grade 4 cystic acne. Some of you might be able to see my acne scars on the camera here, but I ended up getting cystic acne in my early 20s. And these are all signs of hormonal imbalances. And what ends up happening to girls now, and for me back then, is that you go to your doctor saying, I'm having this, cystic acne, and I'm having this kind of stuff happening, is that they put you on the birth control pill. And so they put you on the birth control pill thinking that, it does generally help, get rid of that acne, but it's actually not doing anything for your body. The birth control pill basically shuts off the communication from your brain to your ovaries. So everything that you're having between that time, if you're having, the painful periods and the PMS, you're actually not helping to balance or regulate those hormones, because those are signs of those imbalances between estrogen and progesterone. Basically, the pill, it's a synthetic hormone, is shutting off that communication from your brain to your ovaries and giving you temporary relief outside of you taking it for, obvious reasons of birth control. But if you're taking it because you have these imbalances or these things that are going on in your body, when you come off the birth control pill, those signs and symptoms are still going to be there because you haven't addressed the imbalances. So what I want you guys to take from tonight is that hormonal imbalances can start as soon as we start getting our cycles. And more specifically, we generally see this with girls once they've had their cycles for a few years, because as we get older and as we evolve, I don't like to say age, as we evolve into our womanhood, our hormones are supposed to have ebbs and flows, and they are supposed to change. So just think of how much hormones we have when we are teenagers. So we have a huge abundance. So estrogen, like I mentioned before, is our hormone that is responsible for our reproduction. So it's responsible for our breast production, or our breast development. It's responsible for, creating that nice, thick and juicy endometrium, so that, that's where when we have an egg that fertilizes and we get pregnant, that's where it resides. So estrogen is responsible for that, where progesterone's, also participates in that and helps that egg attach. And then when we don't actually get pregnant at the time, and then our progesterone level drops, and then we shed that lining. So again, estrogen and progesterone work together on a teeter-totter, so we need to have healthy balances of that. So as teenage girls, or we're going into our 20s, we'll see a big surge in that estrogen, getting our periods and our cycles going, and then it takes some time for those to regulate. So naturally, we should allow that process, but if that's continuing on throughout, our early 20s into our mid-20s, and we're starting to notice some different things going on in our body, that's our body's way of saying, hey, there's something wrong. So our body's really well designed to tell us when something's up, right? We have a headache, we could be dehydrated. We have skin disruptions or hives. That's our body saying, hey, I've got an allergic reaction to that. We've got, our body sends signals all the time. So having things like painful periods or cramping, a little bit of cramping is okay because our uterus is a muscle. So it needs to have a little bit of that cramping to shed the lining. But if we're doubled over on the couch in extreme pain, popping Advils and not being able to move, that's not normal, right? If we are confined to our house for a few days because our periods are so heavy that we can't leave, again, that's not normal. That's a high amount of estrogen that we have. We have an imbalance. So things that we can start to notice when we have imbalances in our sex hormones, and I want to say that thyroid conditions can happen, can result in some of these symptoms. We'll start to notice that we have some weight gain. So weight gain, when we're talking about our hormones, I've always mentioned that weight gain can be very, when we are under, a lot of stress, and we have some adrenal insufficiencies or adrenal fatigue, we store our cortisol receptors in our belly. So if we have a lot of stress, we might notice that we carry a lot more of that belly fat there, right? So we notice we see the weight in our belly with stress. When it comes to our sex hormones, estrogen likes to sit on our bum, our hips, and like our thigh area. So some of you guys are probably like, oh yeah, I know that that's where I carry all of my weight. And even for men, I don't want to say that men don't get hormonal imbalances because they sure do. They may not like to admit that they have hormones, but 100% they do. So men have testosterone and estrogen. And when men have an imbalance in their body, when we're looking at hormone imbalances, they start to get more weight in, in their chest area, right? So they start to get, I don't want to say this, but they kind of get like, they'll say like man boobs. They start to notice that they get filled out a little bit more there with the fatty tissue. And then again in the belly. So that's from too much estrogen in their, in the imbalance of estrogen and testosterone. So they might have a drop in that testosterone in their body and have too much estrogen. So we did talk in the previous ones about, endocrine disruptors and how we can have an abundance of estrogen, which we know is estrogen dominance. So we have way too much estrogen in our body and we're not metabolizing enough of that, then we can have that buildup of it, right? So men, again, can have the same thing. So women will notice we carry a lot of that estrogenic weight in our hips, our bum, and our thighs. So we'll notice some weight gain. We'll have a lot of fatigue. So fatigue is very common with adrenal and thyroid conditions. Increased sensitivity to that cold or that heat. That's very common when we're talking about thyroid. Constipation is huge when we're talking about thyroid conditions. Inability to go to the washroom, constipation, or on the other scale, you may have more frequent bowel movements. So I haven't talked about when we have too much thyroid hormone. That's called hyperthyroidism. So that's when our body's producing way too much. More commonly, we see hypo. So hypo is when we see a lot of that sluggish digestive tract, a lot of that fatigue. We're always cold. Our body temperature naturally runs lower. With hyper, it's the opposite. So you might have more frequent, washroom habits. You might be hot all the time. A lot of times we have big or bulging eyes. You may have a lot more anxiety, racing heart, those kind of things. So there's, hypo and hyper. A lot of dry skin and a lot of puffy face. So we see a lot of this in, if you're noticing you have a lot of dry skin, like on your heels or on your legs, even on your hands and your face, can be all related to thyroid conditions, and then the puffy face. So our thyroid and our adrenal glands kind of help, as well as our estrogen, all help with our water balance in our body, our sodium and potassium. So if we have an imbalance, we might start to notice that we're holding on water. So I'm a person that holds on a lot of water near my periods. So about a week before, I can probably put on a good solid 6 pounds on the scale of just water weight. So I have to be really mindful of the foods that I'm eating. That's generally a sign that shows that, my thyroid is a little off, or if I'm under a lot more stress. Because like I said, when one hormone's out, so if I'm under a lot more stress, then my sex hormones are also going to be out, right? So I'm going to have a little bit more rise in that estrogen, and my progesterone is going to a little drop. So we might notice that we have a little bit of frequent urination. We're going to have, we'll start to know we have painful periods. We'll have premenstrual syndrome. So you might be having weird food cravings. You might have irritability, anxiety, inability to sleep. You might start to notice that you have night sweats or hot flashes. These can all be signs of hormonal imbalances. So more specifically, if you're getting into the ages of perimenopause, you might notice that you sweat the bed a little bit. Anxiety and nervousness is very, very common. Depression, increased hunger. You might notice that you're starting to have thinning hair or brittle hair, breast tenderness. You might start to notice that you have cysts in your breast. So fibrocystic breast disease is very common when we have hormonal imbalances. So you'll start to notice you have a lot of breast cysts. Usually the doctor's like, it's okay, it's just a breast cyst, but that generally shows that we have too much of that estrogen in our body, right? So we have estrogen dominance. You might even start to know that you are more prone to cellulite. As we get older, you know, cellulite is a buildup of fat underneath the skin if we don't have enough muscle mass to, you know, if we're not keeping up with our you know, building our muscle. But as we get older and we have those changes in our estrogen and progesterone, we might notice that we carry more cellulite, and that's from the abundance of estrogen. So let's talk a little bit about a couple conditions of hormonal imbalances, because we've talked a lot about you know, signs that might be going on in your body, and you guys are probably all saying like, oh, I have that too. Oh gosh, oh, I have that. So these are all, they're all very common throughout all of these imbalances. And basically when I work with clients and I talk a lot about this, is that, you know, and I've already said this a few times, but we have to look at the top level, right? So we need to look at, you know, how much stress we have going on in our body. We need to look at our history. So what I've been getting a lot of women to do, and you've probably heard, and we'll talk about this tomorrow in my webinar, is we're going to talk about getting into a relationship with our cycles, girls, okay? Your cycles tell you a lot that's going on. So when I talk about getting in a relationship with your cycles, I know moving forward, like I know as a teenage girl, I didn't look at my cycles as anything great. I looked at it as like, oh, this is great. I got my period, I've got to go through this. And it kind of became a burden. But what we need to realize, and what I'm hoping to, you know, install with my two girls when they get to that time, is that your cycle obviously is, you know, that's a part of being a woman. You know, our body is so amazing. So we need to be in touch with our cycles because it tells us so much. So when I talk about that, I want you guys to recognize the signs and symptoms that are coming, that happen throughout, you know, your cycle. So day one of your cycle is when you actually get your period, right? So the day that you start your bleed. And so you need to monitor or kind of take note. I'm not, you know, if you want, you could take, you know, if you feel like you have some imbalances, write down some things that are going on. So just so you guys, if you guys, you know, it's kind of funny. My husband knows my cycle better than me, and this is embarrassing, but he can always tell when it's coming. I'm like, it's not. And then it comes and I'm like, damn, he knows me so well. So there's things that kind of happen that are routine for us. So if you start to notice you have food cravings, or you're not sleeping very well, or if you start having, you know, sweating or things like that, the day of your period, you know, even for me, one of the things I notice is that like I instantly, you know, I'll lose a few pounds off the scale, and it's just water weight, right? Because I hold a lot of weight near my periods. Notice what your cycles are. How long are they? So are they very consistent every month? How long has it been since your last one? So a good healthy cycle is consistent, first off. My cycle is going to be different than your cycle. So we are all unique in our own way. Our cycle is different for everybody, but what makes a healthy cycle is your cycle should be anywhere between 28 to 32 days. So that is a nice, healthy, regular cycle. And your bleeding days should be anywhere between, I usually like to say between 4 to 7 days, because more commonly now when I work with women, they're very common to be about 4 to 5. Now, keep track of, you know, every month. Does it come consistently? Are you very bang on around between that 28 to 32 days? Or do you notice sometimes that, you know, it'll be 21 days one month, 28 the next, 28 the next, 23. Like this shows a little bit of inconsistency. So our inconsistent cycles can show that we probably have an imbalance of that estrogen and that progesterone. So notice how long, you know, it is between your cycles. And then once you get your, you know, your periods, look at look at, you know, the type, how your period is. Are you heavy for the first couple days? Are you passing clots? Are you in a lot of pain? You know, are you housebound because you can't keep up with the flow? You know, you can even look at the color of your flow to see, you know, if it's a bright bright red color, that means you have a good healthy period. But if you're noticing that you have more brownness to that tone or things like that, that might show that there's imbalances and there's some things going on because that's older blood, right? So have a look at your cycles and start tracking those things. That is a great way. That is a great way to, start to get to know your periods and your cycles. And then, once you start to do that, once you start to know, and this also helps prevent the times when you're out, grocery shopping and you get the, oh gosh, did that just happen? Because, you know when your cycle is coming. There's no surprises anymore. Things are, you get to understand when Aunt Flo's coming to town, right? You're expecting her. So, from there, then you kind of get to notice the signs and the symptoms are going. So are you noticing you have a lot more fatigue? Are you noticing you have a lot more fatigue? Are you putting on weight? Are you having food cravings? These things can all kind of equate to different hormonal imbalances that are in the body. So number one, get to know your cycles. So just so you guys know, there's two parts in our body that are really important when we're talking about just, tracking our cycles and understanding our periods when it comes to hormonal imbalances. So our liver is very important, our liver health, as well as our digestive tract. So if you notice that you have an unhealthy digestive tract, right? So if you're having IBS or IBD or anything like that, constipation, if you may be diagnosed with SIBO, so small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or, you have candida, something like that. If you have digestive disturbances in your body, you're definitely going to have hormonal imbalances, because we need to have a healthy digestive tract to create healthy hormones. We also need to have a good digestive tract because we need to excrete the excess estrogen out of our body. So ladies, we actually excrete excess hormones out of our, through our digestive tract. So we excrete it through our feces, as well as we excrete it through our kidneys. So we urinate them out, okay? So if you don't have a good digestive tract and you're having a lot of constipation, you're gonna have excess estrogen in your body. So you need to have a good digestive tract. Our liver is very important. It's the main detoxifying organ in our body. It stops the conversions of hormones into the dangerous state. So if we have too much of estrogen in our body, it can actually convert into the dangerous kind of estrogen that we get that has been linked to breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and uterine cancer. So we want to make sure that we have a good healthy liver, so we can get rid of that excess estrogen in our body, and it helps metabolize other hormones. So we need to have healthy liver and a healthy digestive tract, right? So moving forward, if we, we're looking at this into our life and looking at, hormonal imbalances and things that are going on, and we also have this, some things that you might start to notice that would be classified as hormonal imbalances, and that you probably will hear me talk a lot more about tomorrow, and you've heard me talk the last few weeks, is number one, endometriosis. So I'm speaking on, I'm going to start with that one first because I also was diagnosed with endometriosis in my 20s. So endometriosis is when we grow that endometrium, what we find in our uterus, outside of our uterus. So it can be grown in our fallopian tubes, it can be grown on our ovaries. I had it on my uteral sacral ligament, so it was very painful for me to sit down. I didn't have like extremely painful periods, but I did have them in my teenage years, and I started having other things. But it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that finally I was like, they examined me and I was riddled with it. So endometriosis is definitely a common hormonal imbalance. Fibrocystic breast disease, so I already talked a little bit about that. So that's where we have those cysts in our breast. That can be more common as we get older. So again, when we have too much of that estrogen and not enough of that progesterone in our body, we can start to see women going into something called perimenopause. So we're naturally supposed to go into perimenopause, but what's happening right now is that women generally we can be in perimenopause, ladies, for like up to 8-9 years, right? So we may start to have these signs and symptoms of perimenopause. So basically that's the hormonal imbalance, the natural hormonal imbalance that we go through to hit menopause. And menopause is just basically when our periods end after 12 whole months of not having a period. So it's like the celebration day of like, okay, we've gone 12 full months without our period, menopause has happened, we're no longer getting those, then we move on, right? But it's the perimenopause is where we get all of those, different signs and symptoms that we're going through this. So we get like the hot flashes, we get the night sweats, the irritability. You know, that's when our hormones, right? When our hormones start to fluctuate. So what ends up happening when we go into perimenopause is our ovaries decide, that's it, we're done. I'm not going to, you know, create any more estrogen. So our ovaries shut down the production of estrogen. And then, so, you know, that can cause that imbalance between that progesterone and that estrogen. And then our adrenal glands, remember how I told you guys, you have to make sure we look after our adrenal glands because they're at the top for those hormones, that cortisol. Once we go into perimenopause and menopause, our adrenal glands actually kick in, and that kicks in, and DHA starts to produce that estrogen for us because we still need a little bit of estrogen throughout our lives, of course, right? So our ovaries, as we naturally get older, will stop producing that estrogen, and our adrenal glands kick in. So you can kind of see when, you know, the how everything works synergistically together, and how we need to make sure that at the top we're looking after our adrenals, our thyroid, and then going into our sex hormones. It's not just one hormone, it's all of them together, right? So perimenopause is when we start to decrease that estrogen production, and then we get this, you know, we get that progesterone imbalance. So just so you know, I talked about estrogen, but progesterone is kind of like our chill hormone, okay? So our estrogen or progesterone, when we have a good amount of it, we should be feeling, especially, you know, the week before our periods or when it starts to happen, we should have more relaxation. We should feel very, you know, calm. But if you're noticing that you're just riddled with anxiety, or you're, you know, my husband would say you're moody, and I'm like, no, right? I'm not moody, but it generally, you know, I could be irritable. That shows that there could be, you know, I'm not producing enough progesterone, right? So we want to have that relaxed, you know, being in a state of relaxation near our periods. And so that's when we go into perimenopause. A lot of women feel a lot of anxiety. That's one of the main things that women come to me. I have so much anxiety. You know, I've got a lot of heart racing. I'm going to bed at night. I'm thinking a million miles a minute. I don't know what's going on in my body. Then I get the night sweats, and you sweat the bed. And how many of you ladies out there have sweat the bed? You know, it's not just like you get hot and you need a fan. It's like you got to change the sheets and you got to change the pajamas. It's a whole production. You know, getting some hot flashes. And a lot of that too comes with that is that inability to cope. So where the tears come in, right? So we get, you know, our estrogen, progesterone really gets out of that balance, and we start to notice these things all start to happen, right? It's kind of like if we've had a baby, and for those women who've had babies and you're watching a commercial and you start crying over like a Twizzler commercial and you don't really know why you're crying, but you just are. The same kind of thing happens to us when we're in perimenopause. We start to have that, you know, we can't figure out why we're crying. Our emotions are all over the place. But ladies, this is the next transition into our life. But I'm just putting this out there to show you that this is all controlled through our hormones. Yes, perimenopause and menopause is part of life and things, the next stage that we need to go through. And I don't want you women to, you know, fear it, or, you know, I don't want you guys to fear that or think like this is a disorder or a disease. Menopause is not. It is the end of our reproductive years and on to the next stage in our life. And we need to embrace that with confidence and just own it, because we're women and that's what we do, right? But I'm going to talk about that way more tomorrow. But when we're going into perimenopause, there's definitely those imbalances. And if we have imbalances in our other hormones, we can go into perimenopause earlier. So we're seeing women as early as 35 start to have perimenopausal symptoms. So you start to having that occasional night sweat, or you start to have, you know, other things, you know, an occasional night sweat, or you're starting to have, you know, your periods will become irregular. So you might be like, okay, my period, it might have skipped a month here, or it might have skipped a month there. So these are all signs of, you know, those imbalances I talked about. The last one I want to talk about before I spill all the beans before tomorrow, because I can't wait to share all of this with you guys tomorrow. The last one I want to talk about is very, very common, is something called PCOS. Okay, so polycystic ovarian syndrome. And so I really wanted to talk about this because I have seen more and more women who have reached out to me personally or have, you know, asked lots of questions about what this is. But basically polycystic ovarian syndrome is when we have an imbalance of the male sex hormones in our body. So we've talked a lot about that estrogen and that progesterone and those imbalances that can come with it and the signs and symptoms, you know, to notice that. But PCOS is when we have a rise of things, the male hormone testosterone, as well as androgens. So when people are having, you know, PCOS, basically what ends up happening, it's a very common disorder in our reproductive years. Over 27% of women are diagnosed with PCOS in their during this time in their reproductive years. It's actually one of the leading things to infertility. It causes infrequent or prolonged periods. So basically that means, like, you know, that's again when I was telling you guys, track your cycles, get to know your cycles, because sometimes we live with this for years and years, being like, oh, my periods always have been every like 35 days, or, you know, I get my period every 2-3 months, right? This is where we need to look at, be like, oh, wait, this isn't normal. Like our periods, our cycles should be, you know, very consistent between 28 to 32. We should have regular bleeding times, so 4 to 7 days. So if there's, you know, even though you've been living with these things over and over again, that doesn't necessarily mean it's normal. So we need to make sure. So basically what happens when we have polycystic ovarian syndrome, we have an increase of that androgen in our body. So, and what happens is we create cysts on our ovaries, and our ovaries are responsible for, you know, creating our eggs and leading to, you know, obviously fertilization and then getting pregnant. So there's a couple different hormones when we're talking about PCOS. So I've already talked about, you know, androgen. So if you have PCOS or you think you may have PCOS, some signs is you do, you get chin hair, you might notice more hair growth, so facial hair growth. Even on our chest, it's hirsutism. I never say that word right. I'm like going to practice as much as I have, but you'll notice that you have abnormal hair growth. A couple other hormones that we need to recognize when the imbalances are there is FSH and LH. So follicular stimulating hormone and our luteinizing hormone. And these two hormones, especially when people are going through fertility treatments or having infertility, the doctor always kind of looks at these hormones to check, because the FSH hormone is actually created, it stimulates the ovary to produce the follicle, which is the sac that goes around the egg. And then the luteinizing hormone triggers the ovary to release that egg. So if there's an imbalance, if we have PCOS, what ends up happening is we're not ovulating because we don't have the hormones to create the ovulation and the sac for the egg. So there's generally the three main things when it comes to PCOS is there's cyst on the ovaries. We have high levels of those male hormones, and then we have that irregular periods, and we can lead into things with insulin resistance and infertility. So no ovulation definitely plays a role in PCOS, but it also alters the rest of our other hormones, so our estrogen and our progesterone. So definitely causes a huge imbalance. So there are ways to naturally help balance our hormones and to help look after, you know, if we have hormonal imbalances from all different, you know, avenues. I already talked about how important our liver health is. So making sure that you take, you know, liver supporting herbs. So things like that. I've already seen some great comments here. The ladies out there that are taking milk thistle. So milk thistle is great. It's helps tone our liver, right? So basically gives our liver, it basically gives our liver a little TLC. Right? So you think of how much stuff our liver is. Our liver is our major detoxifying organ in our body. So it's working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our liver never gets a chance to take a break, right? Our liver can be functioning at 30% before we'll even notice that we have something else going on in our body, right? So we need to make sure that we are eating liver-loving foods. We want to reduce our alcohol intake, things like bitters or like, you know, dandelion. We want to eat those dark leafy greens, and supplements like dandelion root or dandelion leaf and milk thistle and even burdock. So these are all great. I do milk thistle every single day in my water. And lots of people ask me questions about cleanses and stuff. Your liver is your natural cleanser. That's your natural detoxifier. So if you're looking after your liver and doing liver loving, then that's your body's natural detoxifier. So you got to really make sure that you are taking care of it, right? You don't need to do, you know, these major detoxes if you are making sure that you're looking after getting those wholesome foods, getting enough protein, and, you know, getting enough nutrients and looking after the health of your liver. So it helps metabolize those extra hormones that we have in our body. Next, our digestive tract. So ladies, if you aren't going poo, you're not getting rid of that excess estrogen, you're holding that bacteria in, you're holding those excess hormones in, you're not going to have a healthy digestive tract, you're not going to have happy, healthy hormones, because we also create hormones in our digestive tract. So 80% of our immune system resides in our digestive tract. 80% of our serotonin production is in our digestive tract. So ladies, our serotonin is our, you know, our happy hormone. So if we have really low moods and we're lethargic and we feel a lot of depression or anxiety, we might not be creating enough serotonin, and that's created in our digestive tract. So we have to make sure that we have a good, healthy digestive tract, right? So putting our liver health and our digestive tract is really important when we're talking about our hormones. Getting to know our cycles, so being boss babes in our reproductive health. So yeah, get to know your cycles, start tracking your cycles, start kind of thinking like, what are the different, you know, things that are going on in my body, and kind of recognizing that. And next, look at taking supplementation that helps to balance and regulate your hormones. So depending on what you kind of imbalances that you have in your body, I just want to talk about a couple herbs that naturally help do this, and some vitamins that you definitely should be taking as a woman to have healthy, happy hormones. So essential fatty acids are really important, right? Our steroid hormones are derived from healthy cholesterol levels in our body, and we also need healthy fats to create. So we need good fats to create good, healthy hormones. I saw somebody put on the screen here, probiotics. Yes, probiotics are essential for a good, healthy digestive tract, so make sure you're taking your probiotics. Essential fatty acids also are great for our inflammation in our body, as well as helping, you know, with our skin health. So if you're noticing you have, you know, really dry skin or you have acne, essential fatty acids are really important for that. Vitamin B6 is really good we need vitamin B6 to create our hormones. If you've been on birth control pills naturally actually deplete our vitamin B6 levels in our body. So you need to make sure that you're getting vitamin B6. Vitamin Bs like to work synergistically together. So a good vitamin B complex, or, you know, a supplement that actually contains vitamin B6 with another vitamin B would be great. And then when we're looking at, you know, herbs that help, things like Vitex or Chastity. So Vitex actually naturally helps regulate and balance. So regulating our hormones is making sure we have nice regulation of that of estrogen and progesterone in our body, and then balancing them out, so having those healthy levels. So if we're under too much stress, we can see lower levels of that progesterone. We can have high amounts of that cortisol. If we have, you know, a lot of estrogens, if we're taking on a lot of excess estrogens in our body, and we have, you know, a sluggish digestive tract, and our liver, you know, our liver might need a little TLC right now because we might be drinking too many glasses of wine. We might start to notice that we have, you know, put on some weight, especially in those areas I talked about. Our periods might be out of whack. You know, taking something like Vitex or Chastity right now might help balance out that estrogen and that progesterone. So Vitex. Another great thing is Dong Quai. So Dong Quai naturally helps balance and regulate our estrogen and progesterone. And guys, these are herbs. So these aren't synthetic hormones that you put in your body and, you know, adjust, you know, these just naturally, they're herbs, they're traditional Chinese medicine, you know, herbs that are used to regulate and balance. They're not to add in additional hormones. You're not going to increase and surge. It helps regulate and balance. So you don't want to take anything synthetic unless, you know, obviously your doctor has prescribed this for you, you're working with a healthcare practitioner, but these are natural balancing and regulating herbs that you can take. So Dong Quai, we've talked about Vitex. Peony is really, really good. Peony helps, it's a skin tonic, so it helps with our skin health, it helps with our adrenal health, but it also helps regulate that estrogen progesterone. So depending on where you are in your hormonal balances, there's a variety of different products that you can take. And I'm going to go over more of those products tomorrow. If you've been joining me for the last few weeks, I've definitely talked about Harmy, the women's brand that I represent. They create a line of products that goes from regular hormonal imbalance, and I don't want to say regular hormonal imbalances, from hormonal imbalances ranging from PMS symptoms, you know, painful periods, irregular periods, if you're having acne, even more so PCOS, anything that I talked about earlier about those imbalances, even leading up into perimenopause. So if you're starting to notice a few things are starting to change or your cycles are irregular, Hormone Balance is a great product for that. They also have a full line of products specific for women for menopause. So whether you're going into perimenopause or into menopause, they have a variety of products, 3 different ones that contain herbs that work synergistically together to help balance out your hormones during this time, that help cool the body. So if you're having hot flashes or night sweats, help you sleep at night. So if you're having a lot of anxiety or you cannot sleep at night, which is very common, you get a lot of insomnia, they have products that are designed for that, as well as containing like calcium and magnesium, because these are all really important as we get older, that to make sure that we're taking to support the needs of our healthy estrogen, our healthy bones, our cardiovascular health. Women have to, once we go into, you know, menopause, there's other health conditions that we need to worry about. So tomorrow I'm going to be talking about how to redefine women's health. And basically what we're going to talk about tomorrow is how to look after ourselves from our early 20s and then going on to longevity into our 70s and 80s. And I'm going to talk about all the things that I think are important when it comes to redefining your health, and whether it's through supplementation and nutrition and all of the things that we need to make sure that we, you know, that we address as women, because we are prone to so many other health conditions and things change as we get older and evolve. So I hope you guys can all join in with me tomorrow. I could talk forever about these things, but I'm going to save it all for tomorrow because it's going to be a great webinar. I'm so thankful for Nature's Fair to allow me to do these Facebook Lives. It's been my favorite thing to do every week with you guys. You guys have been fabulous. I see a lot of familiar names on here. You guys are all amazing. So if you haven't registered for the webinar, it's on Nature's Fair's Facebook page. The link, it's called Redefining Women's Health, and it's the last series of A Hot Mess. And I believe Haley is going to pick our winner for us to choose. So ladies, whoever gets drawn to win the product, you either get the Hormone Balance. So this is the product. It's got Vitex in it, Donquay. It's got vitamin B6. This is the one to help, you know, balance out those hormones. And what I keep telling people is you want to allow at least 2 cycles to notice things. So a little bit of homework, girls. You know, go home, start tracking your cycles, get to know them, and you know, if you do this, see if that makes a big difference. Or if you're in perimenopause or menopausal, I will ask, you know, I'll get in touch with you. You can choose one of our menopausal products. So I'll leave it up to Haley to choose, and I will come back and answer all those questions personally afterwards. Thank you so much, ladies. I'll see you guys tomorrow night. And Haley will let me know who the lucky winner is. You guys are so welcome. Oh, perfect. So it's a Taliwali Chutney is our winner. So thank you guys. So just reach out to Nature's Fair. And then she will, Haley will send me your information, and you get a choice of either taking the Hormone Balance, or if you're interested in the Hormone Menopause products and you don't know enough about them or you have questions about it, I can email you and help choose the product that's best for you based upon your symptoms, so I can get in touch with you. Haley will make sure that we can. So this is the Hormone Menopause. I see a question there. Yeah, that's the day and night. So you can reach out to me with any questions. Please feel free to do so. And if you haven't, make sure you sign up for the webinar tomorrow night, and I will see all you guys tomorrow evening. Thank you so much. Have a good night.